whole lot of loving is what we'll be bringing. We'll make you happy.
Hello and welcome, my friends, to Schools with Heart and part 2 of Community in the Classroom. I'm Olivia LaField, and as I prepare for today's video, it's a perfectly magnificent 85-degree breezy summer day in my wonderful garden. I haven't mentioned, have I, that in my backyard I created an elegant Victorian wedding venue called Promises Kept. If you Google Event-tective, then click weddings, and then location, and then type in Redding, California, you'll find a picture of my garden right there on the first page in the top left corner. Click on that picture of Promises Kept, and then click website. I'm sharing my garden with you today because, as I've said from the very first episode, I really want you to know me on a personal level. Maybe you love gardening too, and maybe we could give each other some good gardening tips. Keeping my garden happy requires a tremendous amount of time and energy, but it's so good for my body and soul. And I love blessing brides with the wedding of their dreams. Just as I'm totally committed to nurturing every single one of my students at school, I'm 100% committed to the maintenance of every single one of my flowers in my garden. But now for the focus of today's video, community in the classroom. Yay, community! I hope you're really excited today to learn more about community and how to create a class that feels like what? Feels like home. Let's start right there today with the concept of home. So what does home feel like? Or perhaps I should say, what is it supposed to feel like? Isn't home the place where we should feel completely accepted, completely welcome, and entirely safe? Isn't it the place where we feel like where we belong, where we're cherished, where we feel like we're an important member of a family that works together, stands together, stays together in the good times and the bad? Isn't home supposed to be the place where we laugh together, cry together, and most importantly, love together? Now, what if we could create a place that felt like that at school? Can you imagine? In other words, what if we could make school feel like home? Does that sound like a far-fetched fantasy to you? Does it sound completely unrealistic and totally inconceivable? If you had asked me those questions in the first days of pouring my heart and soul into creating a room that felt like home, I would have agreed that the possibility of creating home at school would surpass a mere stretch of the imagination. But in the face of supposed impossibility and against all odds, I had the one advantage that I knew made home at school possible. I had God on my side. It was His idea, and that meant that all things are possible. And not only was it His idea, but I knew He would show me how to create it if I trusted Him. So one day at a time, one baby step at a time, He faithfully led the way to the creation of what I soon dubbed caring communities. Caring communities. The word quickly spread, especially at our local university. Olivia LaField had completely revamped and utterly recreated her entire classroom structure and methodology. It wasn't long before inquisitive educators from all over came to observe our radically unique structure. I was being invited to conferences all over California. A cultural awakening hovered on the horizon, and the educational community was ready for change. My traditional, perfectly spaced rows had morphed into congenial groups of 4 or 5 students, all working together as unified teams. The era of the individual had ended, and togetherness had dawned on Sequoia Middle School. God's message to me of "this is not what I have for you" had launched a proverbial movement. So there you have a big picture of what happened and what my new classroom looked like from an external point of view. That is, an observer's perspective. Now it's time to tell you all about the internal anatomy of the groups, about the vital organs that made everything work together like a well-oiled machine. At least, that should make everything work like a well-oiled machine. That internal anatomy to which I refer came explicitly from Peck's book, in which he clearly outlined the integral components of a true community. I dubbed them the 7 commandments of a true community. But because I've lately had a strong sense that I should change the name, I decided on a brand new one: the backbone of a true community. Each of the 7 parts will now be known as a disc. As I've said, the initial how-to was the all-important step of breaking Peck's description of a true community into simplistic terms, a format that the kids could understand and relate to. Essentially, I needed to create the ABCs of a true community. They had to be simple, clear, concise, short enough for my students to memorize, and short enough for me to plaster on a giant bulletin board. As it turned out, not only was that first crucial step a cinch, but in over 30 years, I have not altered a single word of the first ABCs. The only changes whatsoever have been in the form of jazzier, more updated bulletin boards that proudly display the attributes of a true community. And here they are, the magnificent 7 discs of a true community. Number 1, we respect each other. Number 2, we help each other. Number 3, we work as a team. 4, we value each other's differences. 5, we solve conflicts peacefully. 6, we feel safe. And 7, we feel like a family. Simple, yet sacred. Peck assured his readers that these foundational components will, when consistently honored and obeyed, guide what once was no more than a mere group of people, of strangers, toward the eventual creation of a family, a safe sanctuary, a home. With the foundational attributes of a true community firmly in place, the next how-to was the real, and I might add intimidating, challenge. How was I, without any blueprints whatsoever, to actually begin the process of building that home? How would I create that place where, like the school of Peck's childhood, every child in my class is warmly welcomed, where every child belongs? The answer to that question is the story of the last 30+ years of my life, up to and including this very day. Just as life itself is a journey that we take one step at a time, so my journey of building that home began with the first step: sharing my vision with my students. Now that you have the big picture of what my classroom looked to the outside world like once I had instituted community, let's go back in time again so I can show you clearly exactly the way things were in my classroom before community and how I got it rolling step by step. As I recall, it was in the fall of 1988. We'd begun the year in perfectly aligned rows. We were the typically traditional teacher-directed of 1,001 American classrooms, all of which was about to radically change in mine. Step one of the journey with the kids, sharing the vision, was an incredibly exciting day, and my students picked up on my excitement right away. They sensed that we were about to take part in a grand experiment, and they were ready to receive. We began by dividing the class into groups. These were 8th graders, so I decided beforehand that they were old enough to do the moving without me controlling who sat with whom and where. So basically, I stood back and I just watched. As I think of it today, it strikes me that they actually did an amazing job that first day. What could have been pure chaos was actually controlled excitement. Once they settled into their groups and quickly adjusted to the transition from segregated rows to integrated groups, they were ready and eager for the next stage of this wildly new experiment. You can bet I had their full attention as I began to share the 7 attributes of a true community in detail. Having already created a giant poster that displayed the attributes really helped tremendously, as I was able to point to each one as we talked about it. The more we talked, the better they liked the idea of this great, grand new experiment. They did not need convincing, and why would they? Everyone liked the idea of being part of a team that works so well together that they eventually feel like a family. That first day, we accomplished a lot. We moved into groups. I shared the vision of a class that feels like home, and they caught my excitement. In the next episode, we'll continue with the next step in the journey. It's the how-to stage, the one step at a time part, where I trusted God to lead the way. I hope with all my heart that you're getting so excited about the possibility of creating a class that feels like home. Please allow yourself to imagine it, to dream it, to believe that it's possible. Then let me show you how. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.